I My war days began in 1941 when I was 14. We were standing on the lawn, talking amongst a few friends, when my sister came out and said the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. My older brother has signed up into service, but I at 14 couldn't, so had to wait 3 more years while the war went on before I could sign up. At 17, I signed up for the Navy, and in September of 1944 went to boot camp at Samson, New York. Samson, New York is cold in the winter, but it wasn't quite winter yet, so I thought we'd be all right. While I was in boot camp, Ian, is like a very hard soccer drill that lasts 3 months. You learn Navy ways, discipline, and you get in shape. One of the things that I remember during boot camp is going to the mess hall, and after a hard morning's exercise, being very hungry, saw what I thought was coleslaw. I took a lot of it, and the rule in the Navy is if you take it, you eat it. Turned out it was not coleslaw, but sauerkraut. Do you ever eat sauerkraut, Ian? I ate a lot of bread with that meal. I hate sauerkraut. And the boot camp days are filled with just a lot of exercise. At the end of boot camp, you're either assigned a ship or shore duty or school. I was assigned to go to ordnance school. So at the end of my boot days, after my 2 weeks leave, I went back to Samson, New York, and learned ordnance. Ordnance for us was everything from a .45 revolver to a 5-inch 38 gun. You have to learn to take care of them, to shoot them, to where the pieces go, what piece goes with what. It's a lot of learning, a lot of gun practice, but it's kind of fun. At night you have guard duty after the classes, and some nights you just relax. One night I remember on guard duty, we went to a kitchen during the break to make some coffee, and there was a Silex double glass bowl coffee making unit. We looked at it and wondered where the coffee went, bottom bowl or top bowl. You might ask your father if he ever saw a Silex coffee maker like that. He knows where the coffee goes. Eventually we learned where the coffee goes and made coffee, which is nice on a cold winter night in Samson, New York. We got through boot camp and gardening school, and then were assigned to a ship. Mine was the USS Topeka CL-67, a light cruiser that was in Boston, Massachusetts. So when we got aboard the Topeka, which has a complement of men of around 650 people and is made with about 100 or so compartments below deck where the sailors work and live. The hard part in the first few days is finding out just where you live. You're assigned a compartment number and a deck number, and it's up to you to find it. So eventually you know where you live, and then you start practicing what the ordnance people do, which is shooting guns. But you can't shoot them at the dock side. But you can sure practice loading. And we did that, getting ready for our entry into the war zone. One morning, the Topeka sailed away from Boston and headed out to the war zone. It's actually quite dangerous leaving Boston or New York or any of the harbors, because in those days Japanese and German subs were hanging around trying to sink the ships before they got too far out. They didn't sink many, but they sunk a few. We got through that all right and headed out towards the Pacific. Our first stop was in Hawaii, and Hawaii in those days was not a metropolis like it is now, but kind of a laid-back village-type place. We were in Hawaii for a couple of weeks before we were assigned to the 3rd Fleet. We left Hawaii, headed for the 3rd Fleet with a few other ships, and eventually joined the 3rd Fleet in the Pacific War Zone. Ours was a flagship. We had an admiral aboard, and he was a strict ship. You really had to dress properly. If you had one button unbuttoned in your shirt, you got a captain's mast. So it was a strict ship, but we got used to it. At sea, we shot our 5-inch guns many times in practice, wondering what it will be like when we got to the war zone. The first thing we saw in the war zone was the USS Franklin. You might look that up on a computer. It's an aircraft carrier that was in the 3rd Fleet that had a suicide plane drop its bombs and then hit the plane in the early morning while the planes were all on deck, running and ready for takeoff. And those that weren't on duty on deck were down in the mess hall eating. The plane went through the deck with everything blowing up on the deck and blew up in the mess hall. It killed many people. He salvaged the ship and brought it back to Hawaii for enough repairs to get it back to the States. But look up the USS Franklin and you'll see what I mean. This was my first taste of war. It was not pretty. I'll continue to send for this one. I'll do it in a few days.